Friends, we are about to begin services for David Rice. I would ask if anyone has a cell phone or any other noise-making device, if you would please take a moment now to turn it off or place it in the silent mode. Officiating our services today is Rabbi Michael Davis.
Dear friends and family, we're gathered to honor the long life, many sweet memories and connections of David Rice, to be here with the family. We begin with ancient words that are offered comfort to countless generations. You can find it in the inside panel of the handout. If you're following on live stream, any translation of the 23rd Psalm will do. I'll chant it. And you should know that the translation we have here is read as an affirmation, which is how it's usually read. But you should know that the Hebrew of the Bible allows for this to be read as an aspiration. May it be so, rather than it is so. So I invite you to take in these words, either as an affirmation or possibly at this point as an aspiration to be a place of wholeness and faith. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I want to reflect on one word here. I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. See, the Hebrew, which I did not chant, has a word there, which is Veshavti. And that translates, oddly, not as I will dwell, but as I will return. The word for dwell is similar. See if you can hear the similarity and the difference. Vayashavti. Vayashavti means I will dwell, as we read, but what it actually says is Veshavti. Little difference of that ya missing, if you can hear that. And you can see why the translation has been changed, and this is the way we read it, because what does it mean to say, I will return in the house of the Lord forever? Makes no sense. You return to. Once you're there, you dwell in. I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. You see why it was changed. But I've thought, what if there is some deeper meaning that the language itself cannot really contain that shines through, and there is something here. I will return in the house of the Lord forever. Because as we go through our mortal journey, we will inevitably fall away from the path that we chart for ourselves, the path of wholeness, in whatever field that is, whether it's in physical health, emotional well-being, our relationships, our integrity, wherever it is we chart a course, as we move through the messiness, the complexity of life, we will fall away. And when that happens, what we can hope for, what we can plan for, what we can pray for, is that there are those houses of the Lord set aside within which we can return to that path of wholeness, the path we have charted. And those can be traditional houses of worship, and other places, family, friends, music, our back garden, nature, wherever it is, those houses of the Lord within which we can turn back to that path of wholeness and moving forward. And my hope and prayer is that this sacred service is one such house of the Lord within which you can turn back to wholeness and move forward. Ecclesiastes, the wise old king in Jerusalem at the end of his long life, learned a wisdom that earned him that extra name of Ecclesiastes, teaching us the wisdom of surrender, that perhaps which is the hardest of all to let go. Told us in chapter 3, there is a time for all things under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to cry and a time to laugh, a time for war and a time for peace, a time to keep silent and a time to speak. And indeed, we have gathered in respectful silence, and we're here to listen to words of sweetness, of love, of memory. So I'm going to call forward members of the family and friends, dear friends who are like family, to share their thoughts, their tributes at this time. So we're going to begin with cousin Joel, if you would lead us. Come on up. Oh, nephew Joel. We're cousin of some of them, right?
In speaking to one of David's friends before this started, he made an observation about the Rice household that I've often thought but never verbalized, and that's that there are two languages spoken in the Rice household: English and sarcasm. Thank you. And based on that, I wanted to relate two stories about David. The first relates to when I was about 5 years old, so I would guess he would have been about 18. And I don't know what he had in the basement of the Rice household that was liquor, drugs, who knows, women. But he invented a character named Jimmy the Rat. And I think my sister recognizes also, to keep me from going in the basement for whatever reason. And to his dying day, I never knew it was in the basement. But he kept me out. Lissy's Facebook comments about her dad and his sense of humor kind of inspired the next thought, and this is before I was born. My dad returned from World War II, having fought in the Pacific during the Island Campaign, and David always said my father was a Cadillac man, and somehow my father finagled a Cadillac post-war, and I'm not sure if he bought it or stole it or borrowed it, but nonetheless possessed it. And David jokingly, while my dad was visiting the house on Home Avenue, put some sort of a delayed buzz bomb device on the Cadillac. And when my father was leaving, he drove off in his Cadillac, and seconds, minutes later, this thing goes off and it makes the whoop whoop sound that a mortar makes coming in during World War II. Of course, my father, being a Marine, bailed out. The Cadillac apparently hit a tree, and family rumor has it that they hid David for 2 days from my father. So I guess if there's a message out there, it's grandchildren, children, keep that sense of humor, keep that sense of mischief, always. Thanks.
Sister-in-law Sandy, if you're going to come on up.
Can you hear me? Thank you. Born into a family without sons, I had no brothers. But then David came in 1963. my sister's lifelong partner, and the closest I had to a big brother. In time, one would see David felling with joy over his kids and then his grandkids. His delight was infectious, and his quiet competence inspiring. We relied on David, and that's what I'll focus on in these very brief remarks. I found David always to be a comfort and support, a source of good spirit and calm, sustaining vitality, for he was simply there when he was needed, without comment, complaint, or condition. Without a focus on himself, often without a word, David would apply his able energy with the gift of his great good humor. His generosity of spirit was selfless and practical. A few very humble examples of David going about the business of keeping things going. He did the daily scut work that came with the pleasure animals gave them, even though some were only partially domesticated. When he and Collie found antique surprises that they considered rare finds, David was undaunted by the major work often needed to bring gratifying results. I was personally the beneficiary, as he readily granted me time and support during years of frequent visits to Chicago to see my invalid father and try to keep our Michigan blueberry farm viable. David spent long days taking me to Michigan and bringing me back so I could deal with contractors or construction projects or make arrangements for the harvest, enabling me to be quickly efficient before returning to work in the East. What would have been a wearying, solitary burden each time was an easy and productive excursion. David's companionship and interest made it all enjoyable. He never needed to be asked or thanked. Most salient in my memory is David's "uh-oh" as he jumped up from sleep to act instantly in a crisis, bringing help the night my mother died. This man generously eased me through significant passages. I do regret we weren't together more in relaxed and playful passages in life. My big brother David held us up with good cheer and held us together unasked whenever he sensed that we needed him. David's life was a blessing, as his memory shall be.
And now Carol.
I'm going to do the best I can, folks, to honor my husband. But it's been a hard couple of days. When David and I were dating, after going on a blind date, he'd often start a phone call by asking me what color I was that day. Today I am gray. After a courtship of 3 years, it was finally his consideration of taking an engineering job on the Orinoco River that finally moved David to a proposal of marriage. So even though the adventure on the Orinoco never happened, the adventure of our lives together began. Thank you, Sammy. And as our lives together developed and our children were born, I was to discover this man of character, David Rice. This man of quiet accomplishment, who was never flashy or macho, but admired and befriended by the leaders in companies he did business with. David never inhabited a stereotype. I'm a little shaky. He had been so plagued with asthma as a child that it delayed his entrance into school by a year. But he became a Marine. Ironically, he could never muster an attack when it would have been to his advantage during a hurricane at Camp Lejeune. Growing up, David had a number of cousins very close in age. A lot of them are still here. They were almost like brothers and sisters. He was so dedicated to his family and friends, always keeping in touch, even asking me often if I had spoken to so-and-so and wanting the latest info, even about my own friends. One of the business friends he especially admired had been a fighter pilot in World War II. These everyday GIs who went on to win the war were special heroes to David. Some of his favorite TV programs were movies about World War II. So much so that I would joke and ask if he thought they were going to change the ending. Back when we were married, women couldn't even get a credit card in their own name. But David always encouraged me to be my own person, to go to England to explore Wedgwood pottery, to become a docent at Lincoln Park Zoo, to involve myself more and more over time with my native plant interests, and finally to open my own business, mailboxes, etc. David was surely the glue that held our lives together. As his condition declined, all the things he took care of started to need repair. The boiler, the plumbing repeatedly, the electricity, even the refuse collection. So I was operating in unfamiliar territory. I was lucky to find honorable people to help. David is finally free of the pain he lived with for over a year. I am so comforted to be surrounded by my family and friends.
Go forward, Basil, cousin Basil.
My name is Basil Kromelow. I'm David's first cousin. I knew David his whole life. And I want to tell you a few things that we did together. First mischievous adventure we got into, I was about 5 years old and David was 6. And he lived on 1100 South Home Avenue in Oak Park. And there was a family gathering there, and our parents, my father and his mother, came from a large family of 8. So there was a big crowd. Well, David and I left the family party and walked down to Roosevelt Road. That was before there was an expressway there. And there was a movie theater there. And the manager said, "You want to see the movie?" And we said, "Sure." So we went in to see the movie. We watched the movie, and then we finished watching the movie, and we walked home. Well, we were gone about 3 to 4 hours. And when we walked in the house, everybody said, "Where were you? We had the police looking for you." David's mother threw her arms around him and said, "Thank God you're safe." My mother said, "Don't ever do it again," and broke a hairbrush on my butt. We lived on the south side in South Shore, and David came out to visit one day, and we had a bicycle built for 2, a tandem bike, and we started to ride south from 79th Street, and we had the wind at our back, and we rode and rode and rode, and we must have rode to 128th and Torrance, something like that, and not realizing that the wind would be at our face going back. Now, we were about 11, 12 years old. David had his bar mitzvah shoes on. We started to ride back, and it was really awful going until I figured out, I was in front, I figured out that David had his feet up and wasn't pedaling. So I said, well, I'll ride in the back for a while, Dave, and you ride in the front. So we did that, and then I quit pedaling. And then we got aggravated at each other, and we threw the bike down. And we walked away, and we said, the hell with the bike, we'll walk home. Well, that didn't work out either. We went back and got the bike, and we were coming through. On the way back, we took a shortcut through a viaduct. It was all muddy and everything. And David stepped in the mud, and he said, these are my bar mitzvah shoes. I'm going to get killed. And he stomped his foot to get the mud off his foot, and the mud went in his eye. And he said, oh, my God, my eye, my eye. I started to laugh. I got the church giggles. I started to laugh, and somehow we got home that night. David and I went to University of Illinois together, and we pledged the same fraternity house. We were looking for an automobile to buy, and it was a 1930 Model A Ford across the street from our fraternity house with a for sale sign on it, $50. So I said, David, you want to buy this? He said, yeah. Well, we had $17 each, so we were short. We had to take a third partner in to swing the deal. Now that car was 1930. That was the old style cars. And we were driving down Armory Street one day and going by a fraternity house. Two fraternity houses were having a water fight, and they were throwing water at each other, buckets of water at each other. David was driving, and they threw a bucket of water and hit him right in the face with it. And instead of going and keep going, he took a turn and went up on the sidewalk and went up on the grass, and the grass was soaking wet. And he drove across the lawn, both lawns, and guys were running in front of the car, getting out of the way, and he spun the tires and tore up 2 lawns and drove back. And that was the end of that. We never heard any more about that. Then we decided to take the car to Chicago. On the way home, we threw a rod, and the car kept running and laid down a smoke screen on the highway. And we finally got to a gas station, and the guy said, you're going to throw a rod? And David said, we already did. And somehow we got home to tell the tale. There are so many stories I could share about David. The experiences we had together through laughter and sometimes tears. David was a mentor, an older brother, and so much fun to be with and to be around. I will miss the camaraderie, advice, closeness, and laughter, and most of all, my best friend. Adios, amigo.
Their family friend Forrest, if you want to come up.
As I'm looking around, most of you probably don't even know me. My name is Forrest Hoover, and for a short but really formidable time, I was a permanent fixture in the Rice household. I wrote this letter to David. It's been 7 years already, and it's very hard to believe it's been that long. David, excuse me, I'm a school teacher, but this is still very nerve-wracking for me, so please excuse me. I saw the photos from your birthday on Facebook and want to take a minute to drop you a quick note. First of all, happy birthday. You look great. Second, please accept my gratitude. As you know, I didn't have a father figure in my life. My dad died when I was very young. You helped me see a good father and a husband. Believe it or not, I think of you about things you told me over 40 years ago. I am in part the man I am today because of what I learned from you. Your patience and kindness and things, are things I remember and try to model. Wow, also I've grown a great mustache just like you. If you can get on Facebook, you can check it out. Thanks again, Posey Moore, Forrest Hoover. Thank you.
And finally, children, Adam, Jenny, and Melissa coming up together. Please.
We only rehearsed one time.
For those of you who don't know us, I'm Adam.
I'm Jenny, I'm the middle. And I'm Melissa, but I will be frequently referred to as Lissy during the next 10 minutes. So we want to thank you all for joining us to celebrate our father's life today. Our family has received so much support over the past few days, and many of you have spoken of our father's wonderful character. While there will certainly be tears today, as my dad would say, stop crying, that's not going to make you feel any better. We would like you all to hear about our father from the perspective of his children, so buckle up. This is going to be a funny ride. In preparing this talk, we realized my dad had so many facets to his life. He was an Oak Parker, a University of Chicago grad, a proud U.S. Marine, a steel mill worker, a Lincoln Parker, a smelter, and I don't mean fish, a gentleman farmer, a Barringtonian, if that's a word, a shipping magnate, a small business owner, an antique dealer, and of course, the president and sole member of the Bob Steele fan club. Who's Bob Steele? A D-list Western movie actor from the 40s that my dad had an affinity for. Of course, he was also a son, a brother, a cousin, an uncle, a grandfather, and a husband. Of all of these facets, only 3 of us knew him as a father. We thought it would be nice if you could see him through our eyes. We've cut Adam out, basically. We promise, he's got words. As many of you probably know, we grew up in Lincoln Park in the heart of the city. The neighborhood was a little disreputable, especially when our parents bought the 4-flat that we lived in, with hookers and homeless people on the corner, but for us, it is still the center of the universe. We patronized many of the businesses in the neighborhood, especially the restaurants. One restaurant in particular that we frequented, Dad would refer to as the Greek joint, and he would tell the waitress to surprise me without even opening the menu. He'd always offer us a bite of food from his plate, and if one of us ever liked his dish better, he would, without hesitation, offer to swap his meal with ours.
In spite of all the, shall we say, local color in our upbringing, we all had childhoods that were normal and healthy in all the ways that are important, playing catch in the park and that sort of thing. And we were lucky to have both that color and that normality. As we were thinking about our childhoods, some images came to mind. A kosher salami always hanging on a hook by the sink in the kitchen, back scratching being one of Dad's favorite things, often using a boomerang he kept on the dresser or against a door frame, telling us kids to eclipse yourselves when he wanted us out of sight. Sleeping contests. Whoever falls asleep first wins a dime. He routinely fell asleep first, so he never got that dime. Dad's tastes in movies and music stopped evolving somewhere around 1950. He had an encyclopedic knowledge of movies up to that point, and he had a cassette deck in his car and would always play music from the war era. Although he loved the movie Saturday Night Fever and took us as little kids to see it, which might have been a little age inappropriate. Sports played a big role in our home. He loved going ice skating and on bike rides through the city. We lived near a pond that froze over in the winter, so we often skated there. He said ice skating was the closest thing to flying. When the weather was nice, he'd lead us on bike rides through the city alleys, as he always thought that this was a great way to see the city without having to navigate traffic. When I was very little, Dad was giving me a ride on the handlebars of his bike. He rode over railroad tracks and I went flying. He jumped off the bike, afraid he'd killed his only son, and picked me up. I exclaimed, "Daddy, Daddy, can we do it again?" It clearly didn't scar me psychologically, as I'm still an avid cyclist. Our father encouraged and supported our athletic aspirations, and we were involved a lot, from Little League, horseback riding, and gymnastics when we were younger, to cross-country, volleyball, basketball, softball, and swimming through high school. He even coached a Little League team that Lissy played on. He always found time to watch us compete in games and meets, and he always made sure we had all the equipment we needed, bikes, ice skates, and so on.
Our father dreamed of any or all of us going to college for free. He offered each of us a car of our choice if we went to West Point, though I'm guessing he would have been perfectly satisfied with any of the service academies. At some point, he must have recognized that this was just not in the cards. He shifted his thinking and purchased a javelin for Jenny and me. He was convinced that if we, two athletic females, learned how to throw a javelin, certainly we would be eligible for an athletic scholarship, because nobody graduated high school knowing how to throw a javelin. So he'd take us out in the middle of Lincoln Park, next to North Pond, and we'd toss the javelin. We received no formal training other than some basic information from a coach at our high school. We did get plenty of funny looks and questions such as, "Are you spearfishing?" Much to his dismay, we did not get scholarships to college, as our javelin prowess never really took hold. The javelin did, however, acquire a new purpose. My dad proclaimed that any of our suitors had to be able to throw the javelin farther than us. The javelin is indeed still in the house, so if any of you have javelin dreams, let us know. We can find it a new home.
Charlie did throw the javelin farther than me. It's the only reason we're married. So, okay. When we were in high school, our mom and dad wanted to begin their own fitness regimen, and they set out to take their first bike ride. So they donned their new sweatsuits and grabbed their new sneakers and headed out to Lincoln Park. On their inaugural ride around Lincoln Park, they made their way to the far side of the pond, and for those of you that knew Lincoln Park at the time, there was a big casting pond. Think fishing, not broken arm. So they made their way around to the back side of the casting pond. Hold on, I lost my spot. Oh, and they discovered that someone had fallen in the water. The pond was stagnant and the water was disgusting, but Dad, being the Good Samaritan, waded in to help pull the guy out. He quickly discovered that the guy was sauced, shall we say. So my dad grabbed his arm and it came off. It was a prosthetic arm. So he grabbed the other arm and that came off too. Amputee. Eventually, somehow, they wrangled the poor guy out of the pond, but our parents took, come on.
It's really hard to hold the mic.
It is.
Paper.
Our parents took this as a sign that exercise was a bad idea all around, and this then concluded their brief adventure in exercising. If you knew our family at all, you knew we had pets, lots of pets.
We had an abundance of pets in our home growing up, including cats, dogs, birds, salamanders, and gerbils. Our mother also volunteered at the zoo, which somehow had our home designated as a temporary rescue shelter for a variety of animals. Our dad once came home to find that his shower had been overtaken by a brood of ducklings. Dad was complicit in this, occasionally bringing home stray dogs from the lead refinery where he worked. Guests to our home would often find my dad offering them one of our pets. He'd even offer to pay them to take the pet, asking, "Do you need a cat?" He was exceedingly tolerant of the Noah's Ark we had in our home. As you might imagine, when you have an abundance of pets, some were good, some were not so good, but all of them met the same eventual fate after a final visit to our veterinarian. Our mother did not want to dispose of the pets at the vet, so they would be transported back home in a pillowcase. Our father would hand off the pillowcase, usually to Jenny, to find a final resting place on the property in Barrington. Mind you, when an animal passes in the middle of winter, the ground is too hard to dig. So the freezer in the garage served as a makeshift morgue for some of them until the ground thawed. On one occasion, while looking for ice, a visitor discovered a dead cat in there. Suffice it to say, there are dozens of shallow graves in the backyard, also known as the pet cemetery.
With his swarthy features, people who interacted with my dad routinely mistook him for a member of their own ethnic group, Italian, Mexican, Russian, Greek, and so on. We were waiting to be seated in an Italian restaurant once, and the owner came over and said to my dad, "Parla Italiano?" He was also regularly asked for directions in Spanish when we lived in the city. When I was born, the story goes that my dad was looking at me through the glass in the maternity ward. Apparently, an old Italian woman with a mustache thicker than my dad found a kindred spirit. Thank you. Found a kindred spirit in him. Pardon my bad Italian accent. She asked, "Is that your daughter?" He said, "Yes." And she replied, "She's gonna be more trouble than 10 boys." To which my dad reminded me about all the time. He grew a mustache sometime around 1970, and it somehow never seemed ironic. In fact, it looked fitting on him. At some point, decades later, he shaved it off, and none of us could remember ever having seen his upper lip. It was very disconcerting, so he grew it back.
Dad, Pops, Grandpa, Dave. David! That's what my mom would call him. Whatever you called him or however you knew he was the most selfless person. He always put the needs and wishes of others before himself, and he never complained about it. Our dad always kept a bottle of vodka in the freezer. One of his favorite treats was a potato pancake with sour cream and a little dollop of caviar on top, chased by an ice-cold shot of vodka. If you ever came to a party at my parents' house, you were likely greeted by my father with a shot glass in one hand and an ice-cold bottle of vodka in the other. We may be somewhat biased, but we definitely think we hit the jackpot by having him as our father. So next time you're out for a drink, order a shot of ice-cold vodka and raise a toast to our father.
Let's take a few moments of silent reflection, for private memories, a prayer if you like. Let's take a few moments together. Carol and the family invite you, if you have your own memories and stories, to bring them to the Shiva and to share them and to tell them when you come. A modern poet wrote, "You can shed tears that he is gone, or you can smile because he has lived. You can close your eyes and pray that he will come back, or you can open your eyes and see all that he has left. Your heart can be empty because you cannot see him, or you can be full of the love that you shared. You can turn your back on tomorrow and live yesterday, or you can be happy for tomorrow because of yesterday. You can remember him and only that he is gone, or you can cherish his memory and let that live on. You can cry and close your mind, be empty and turn your back, or you can do what he would want, smile, open your eyes, love, and go on." We turn to the closing prayer for this part of the service, to the El Malei Rachamim. It's traditional to rise for this, so I invite you to rise as you are able. If you're seated next to somebody who cannot rise, then stay seated next to them so they are not alone. You can find the English for it under the 23rd Psalm in the handouts. Hail Malei Rachamim Shochein Bamromim Hamtzei Menucha Nechaino Tachas Kanfei HaShechina Im Kedoshim Utehorim Kezar Arakia Mazhirim Es Nishmas Yakirenu David Shalach Li'olamo Lochein bol harachamim, yastirehu beseter kanafav, li'olam yiyim. V'yitzror achayim et nishmato, Adonai hu nachalato. V'yanuach v'shalom al mishkavo. V'nomar Amen. O God, full of compassion, thou who dwellest on high, grant perfect rest beneath the sheltering wings of thy presence, among the holy and pure, who shine as the brightness of the firmament, and to the soul of David Rice, who has gone unto eternity. Adonai, have mercy, bring him under the cover of thy wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life, be God's possession, and may his repose be peace. And we say, Amen. Please be seated.
Friends, this concludes this portion of the service here at our chapel. The interment will continue at Rose Hill Cemetery in Chicago. Upon return from the cemetery today, beginning at 3 p.m., the family will be together here at our Skokie Chapel. They'll actually be just across the way in the smaller chapel across the lobby. That'll be today until 6 p.m. That information is available inside the folders that you received as you arrived today, and if you did not receive one, they will be made available as you depart. And for those of you who are joining us via the live stream, they'll see that information is on our website as well. For those of you joining us in procession, we'll ask that you please keep a few safety measures in mind. Please make sure that you have your bright headlights and your hazard lights on at all times in the procession, and please follow the car in front of you as closely as safety permits to avoid any gaps in the procession. We'll also be providing flags and stickers to place on the passenger side of your front windshield as you depart. The following have been asked to act as pallbearers today. When I call your name, I'll ask you to please come forward. Adam Rice, Jeremy Murphy, Charlie Murphy, Basil Kromelow, Mike Lynch, Joel Brosk, Nate Cohen, and Josh Cohen. We'll ask those of you who can to please rise at this time as we escort Mr. Rice, the family, and the clergy from the chapel.